Hello everybody, my name's Nick Bumpus with Plumbers and Steamfitters Local Union 598. I want to thank all of you and welcome you here to our local union in Pasco, Washington. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce a few of the current and former Hanford workers that are here joining us today. Dave Klug, John Swain, Mike Kane, Melinda and Lonnie Rouse, Angel Bennett, Bobby Joe McLaughlin, and Mark Moakler. Now I'm going to turn it over to the Attorney General of the State of Washington, Bob Ferguson. Thank you.
Nick, thank you so much. And first, let me thank each and every one of you for being here today. I was speaking to Bertola, who I'll introduce here in a little bit. And when I first saw her, the first thing she said was, it's another fight. Right? It's another fight for Hanford workers. And Bertola, you're exactly right. It's another fight, but it's a fight we've all been in together for a long, long time. And the workers here, Nick, more than anyone. And so thanks to each and every one of you for being here. And thanks to members of the press for joining us here today and to UA 598 for hosting this press conference. We're here today to stand together for Hanford workers and call on the Biden administration to stop this assault on Hanford workers here in Washington State. So I want to be very clear from the beginning. The request from all of us is for this administration to drop their appeal to the United States Supreme Court. They can do that, they've got the power to do it, and they need to do that. Washington State passed a law in 2018, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, making it easier for Hanford workers to access the benefits they deserve if they become sick on the job. There was a legal challenge to that state law from the last administration. We defeated it in federal court twice, and we will continue to defend it. But the workers who are with me here today, and the many hundreds and thousands more who cannot be here today, do not deserve to have this fight before one more court. It's time to bring this fight to an end. And a president, Joe Biden, a president who says he's on the side of workers, needs to do the right thing and stand up for workers here at Hanford and drop this appeal. So we have several speakers after I give some introductory remarks. We're joined by former State Representative Emmanuel Noel, Larry Haler, who co-sponsored this bill. Larry, thank you so much for your leadership. Tom Carpenter, Executive Director of Hanford Challenge. Nick Bumpus, who you met earlier, of UA 598. And Hanford workers, Abe Garza and Bertola Bugarin. So first I'll give a brief overview of this 2018 law that Larry led on at the state legislature, joined by many people here in support. At the end of our remarks, we're happy to take questions from the press that are here. So in 2018, the state legislature passed House Bill 1723 with overwhelming bipartisan support. It wasn't close. And that bill made it easier for Hanford workers to access worker compensation benefits when they are found to have certain illnesses related to their work at Hanford. My office and the folks you see here all supported that bill. Before Larry led that effort, before that bill passed, Hanford workers suffering from an illness related to their works, respiratory disease, for example, they had to prove that whatever their illness was not caused by the vapors they were exposed to at Hanford. Proving that causation, as you might imagine, required a long, expensive, bureaucratic fight. In some cases, workers died before they could conclude that process. And the burden was virtually impossible to meet. How do you prove one particular chemical out of the hundreds and hundreds that are present at Hanford is a specific one tied to you? A virtually impossible burden to meet. Thanks to Washington's law, now, when a worker who has worked at Hanford has certain respiratory or neurological diseases that we know are linked to tank vapors, it is presumed that that illness is related to their work. That makes sense, and that's fair. In fact, we do that in other contexts. Firefighters have that presumption. First responders have that presumption. We have that in our laws already. Hanford workers deserve that protection as well. So now, Hanford workers who get sick on the job, those workers and their families no longer have to fight to get those benefits and the relief that they deserve. Congress has given authority to states like Washington to pass such laws and protect workers. And that's exactly what Washington State has done. Nonetheless, the last administration chose to file a federal lawsuit challenging the legality and constitutionality of that law. The AG's office defends state laws, and that was our job. In June of 2019, Judge Bastian of the United States District Court, Federal Court, for the Eastern District of Washington, granted our motion for summary judgment. He upheld the law. He specifically ordered and ruled that Congress authorized Washington State to provide these protections for workers at Hanford. The Trump administration refused to give up. They filed an appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in their effort to gut these protections for workers. In August of 2020, the three-judge panel, randomly assigned to our case, ruled unanimously in support of the state of Washington. The judge who wrote that opinion, upholding our law, was appointed by President George W. Bush. Then just last week, just days after Labor Day, President Biden's Department of Justice filed another appeal. And this is their last shot. They filed an appeal seeking review from the United States Supreme Court. To say that this was a surprise and a disappointment would be an understatement, I think, for all of us. I have to believe that President Biden, a man who claims to support workers, was never consulted on this. As a longtime champion of those workers, President Biden must agree that Hanford workers deserve the protections that Larry and the state legislature put in place. Look, I'll be candid. I was angry when the Trump administration challenged this law. I'm still angry that this new administration is continuing this outrageous attack on Hanford workers. My office will continue to fight for Hanford workers. As Bertola said, it's another fight, right? And I think what I want to say is that, it's a legal case, right? And believe me, the law is complicated, right? What can the federal government do? What can the states do, right? These are complicated. All legal cases are. You're citing precedent. We're citing to a congressional act from literally 80 years ago that we say gives us the authority to do this. But, as I like to say, every legal case has a story, right? No matter how arcane it may seem, no matter how much you look at the briefs and the briefs seem like some foreign language, right, of legal terms, it may seem like a foreign language. In some ways it is. But really, a case is a story. Sometimes that story is a little harder to parse out than others. This one's pretty straightforward. It doesn't get more simple than this. Washington State has placed protections for workers here at Hanford in our state law. And the federal government is trying to take those away. And if someone's got a tougher job in Washington State, or anywhere else in this country for that matter, raise your hand and tell me what it is than a worker at Hanford. Tell me what it is. And look, I realize this is not a kind thing to say, but it is true. If the men and women working at Hanford worked at a site that was on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., and they were all the sons and daughters of people at the Department of Justice and in the Biden administration and in Congress, we would not be having this conversation. You know it, and I know it. That's not right. So my job is to defend, as the people's lawyer, to defend those workers in court. It's also our job collectively to tell their story. So somebody in that administration hears their voice and does the right thing and drops this appeal right now. So with that, I'd like to reintroduce someone who I mentioned before, a real leader on these issues, a champion. We've met here many years ago, right here inside this hall for a gathering with Hanford workers. Larry Haler, who again is the author and the prime sponsor of the bill that is now the subject of this press conference. Larry, thank you for your leadership.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Larry Haler. I'm a retired state legislator, and I introduced this bill. I was a prime sponsor on it. Nick Bumpus brought it to me originally, and I said, well, what chance do we have of getting this bill passed? And he said, probably a very good one. He says, I have other people who are going to sign on if you'll prime it. So it was my honor to be able to prime this bill to help Hanford workers who face challenges of illness that other workers around this state do not know about or even could even handle. I had a friend the other day tell me he was thankful for this bill because he spent just one day in the tank farms and got contaminated by breathing in the fumes and he had to quit his job because of his injury. So there are still people being injured out there by the tank farm gases that are coming out. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this go to the Supreme Court if that's where it's going to go. Hopefully it will not, and President Biden will step in and dismiss this case and let it stand. So thank you very much for the opportunity of speaking today, and God bless all the Hanford workers and the people of the Tri-Cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. The next speaker is Tom Carpenter. Again, he's the executive director of Hanford Challenge, a man who I think really needs no introduction on these issues. He's been fighting for Hanford workers for many, many years. Tom, thank you for your work and look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. 25 years for
Who's counting, right?
on these toxic vapor issues. Frankly, we are appalled at the Biden administration and the U.S. Department of Justice seeking to dismantle Washington State's law that was passed to improve the standards for Hanford nuclear site workers. In 2018, as already been said, Washington State legislature and the governor recognized the terrible price that Hanford workers sometimes have to pay being on the front lines of the cleanup of the worst contaminated facility in the United States. The law's passage was in part motivated by the testimony of some of the folks who are here and other Hanford workers who had become sickened with serious and long-term illnesses resulting from exposure to toxic vapors from Hanford's nuclear waste tanks. These men and women were on the front lines of this cleanup. Those exposures wrecked their health. And though these exposures may have happened some years ago, it's still wrecking their health. And those health consequences include brain damage due to mercury, heart disease, respiratory illnesses, multiple chemical sensitivity. Many of the chemicals are known carcinogens. They cause cancer. The most tragic aspect of this situation is that these exposures were preventable, yet workers were not afforded the necessary workplace protections such as supplied air, respiratory protection that you carry on your back. In fact, many workers were harassed, ridiculed, and lied to when they requested such protections. Hundreds of nuclear workers have been sent for medical evaluation. Many have been hospitalized as a result of these toxic vapor exposures, which led to, in 2014, the filing of a lawsuit to compel the Department of Energy and the contractor to better protect the workers out there. And that case did get settled with Hanford agreeing that they would do better. However, those protections have been rolled back. But as a result of everything that happened there, the legislature woke up and said, wow, there's a lot of sick people out there who got sick simply from working there, and they didn't have the right protection. So instead of attacking workers' rights to get compensation, we're asking the Biden administration to work to uphold and even replicate these kinds of laws. We join with Bob Ferguson and the local union and others to call upon the Biden administration to drop this lawsuit, this appeal. Hanford workers deserve the kind of legislative reform they received that will help them to get the compensation and medical care resulting from illnesses caused by working at Hanford. And it's heartbreaking that this administration is continuing the former administration's assault on this law, which is providing much needed compensation. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Tom. Next up is a man you met earlier, Nick Bumpus of UA 598 Plumbers and Steam Fitters. Nick has been a true champion, working side by side in our previous litigation that Tom referred to. And so, Nick, thank you so much for your leadership.
Hello again. My name is Nick Bumpus. On behalf of every single member of Local Union 598 and our business manager, Randy Wally, I want to start out today by saying a few things. Number one, the work that our members perform on the Hanford site comes at serious and with serious risks. It comes with serious hazards. But every day our members show up, they suit up, and they get to work. The Department of Justice's decision to challenge hard-fought protections for Washington workers and their families is atrocious. After President Trump's failed attempts to strike down protections for our nuclear veterans, it is unconscionable that the Biden administration would continue to pursue this immoral endeavor. Attempting to overturn the law of the land, to abandon injured families in Washington state, to deny sick workers the health care that they deserve, is both cruel to their families and disrespectful of their service. In 2018, the legislature of the state of Washington stood shoulder to shoulder with organized labor to speak out against injustice, to provide basic protections for workers, and to ensure that those serving this nation at the most contaminated site in the Western Hemisphere have access to health care. Now, to be clear, this is a matter of life and death for workers suffering from devastating illness, all too often dying in the course of their service to this nation. And no philosophical dispute should ever overshadow this stark reality. These are Americans who work every day to protect our environment, our water, and our future. The federal government should spend more time creating safer work environments for working families that serve this nation every day, and less time attempting to strip them of their health care. We also call on the Biden administration to immediately withdraw from this unscrupulous pursuit. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Our final speakers are individuals I mentioned before, Hanford workers Abe Garza and Bertola Bugarin. Thank you both for being here and speaking of your personal experience.
Hi, I want to tell you guys a little bit of what happened on the last incident my husband had at work. On August 14th, 2015, my husband called me that he did not feel well and he had a nosebleed that would not stop. And I asked him what happened. He says, we had our pre-job, went out, because he's lost his sense of smell, he has to depend on others for safety. Others were reporting a bad smell. He says, I have to let you guys guide me. I don't smell anything. Once he got a nosebleed, everybody set off with a procedure to put things in safety and remove themselves and report it. When he got home, he said he wasn't breathing well and he could taste a metallic taste in his mouth. The next day, he had oxygen levels in the lower 80s, and he ended up hospitalized. He was never the same from that hospitalization. Doctors would come in and ask him, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. He couldn't tell him what happened. He could not tell him what was wrong with him. That was a chemical fog that caused all this damage to him. And later on, we found out that he had toxic encephalopathy due to all the exposures he had had out there, 30-some years. And this last one tipped him over to where he could not return to work. He could not drive. He could not remember where he lived. He would get up from the sofa and could not remember what he was going to do. He got diagnosed with diabetes because of steroid treatments over and over again. He ended up with nerve damage because of chemicals out there. He ended up with his lungs with COPD, fibrosis in his lungs, and Hanford called it occupational asthma. And he also got heart damage because of mercury. He got his toxic encephalopathy because of mercury and many, many other, some of the most dangerous chemicals known to man right here in our backyard. And I'm saddened that they are challenging this law. He ended up with constant ringing in his ears. He ended up with diabetes, vocal cord dysfunction, loss of smell, and now he's having problems processing because of the toxic encephalopathy. His life, our lives, totally changed. The day of the accident should have been preventable. It was waste disturbing activity. They should have been notified. None of the workers were. They should have been in full force of every protective gear that should have been offered to them, including fresh air, and it was not. They were out there with nothing but their basic whites and normal gloves, and that was it. And then it was reported to us when the incident report came, it came out really high on mercury. And then it says, oops, it was a mistake. We got a second version. They changed the decimal point from millimeters to...
From milli to micro.
From milli to micro, which put him way under. Then we got the
occupational
standards. And then we got the third report that looked nice and clean. We then really questioned what was going on out there and what had happened to him. To this date, 4 of his close friends have died that we know of. 2 of them with toxic encephalopathy and others with cancer and many, many other ailments, including lungs. And my husband was healthy when he started working. He was a competitive jogger, played handball. We went hiking all the time. He no longer has not been able to do that. And incrementally, pretty much everything got taken away. He had to learn how to drive again. He had to learn to read again. And he's trying really hard every day to learn to process and carry everyday activities. I'm saddened that this law is being challenged. We had a hard time proving what chemical did this to him, because they don't test for hardly anything. And we have very little resources as far as doctors and clinics to go to help us decipher this. Without this law, many people have died and they will continue to die, and others injured at different levels. And it impacts not only immediate families, but the entire community. And I think this law is a protection that should remain. This work will continue, and it'll continue for as long as probably the earth is here. Half shelf of some of this stuff is millions of years, and it is in our backyard. And we have a responsibility. The workers want to do their work. They just need the protection to do it appropriately, and that's all we are asking. And if incidents do happen, the only thing we can rely on is this L&I, because the old one was not working, and hardly anybody was getting through. And it is stressful going through all these lawsuits. It's stressful going up and down with what is happening to this law. And I hope Biden does do the right thing and maintain it. These workers deserve this law and need the law. Thank you.
Aben Bertola, thank you so much for sharing your story. So with that, I will take any questions that folks have. I'll do my best. I think we might have some folks on the phone line, calling in. So I'll do my best to repeat the question so they can hear it. And if folks come up to answer the question, if you don't mind just saying your name for the folks who are listening in who can't see you, that'd be helpful. So we'll open up any questions that folks have. So the question, thanks, Suzanne. The question is there a deadline for the court to make their decision? One thing I probably should have said, Suzanne, to be a little bit more clear, is that what the Biden administration is doing is they're going to be asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case up. So the Supreme Court will make a decision, but that's on the court's timeline. it won't be next week or the week after, but I would anticipate that there's a chance sometime this year that we would know whether or not the Supreme Court is saying, yes, we want to take the case, in which case my office would be filing briefs, right? The Department of Justice would file briefs, and eventually there'd be an oral argument at the U.S. Supreme Court. But that's really up to the U.S. Supreme Court to decide when they make that decision. So I can't give you a definitive date because it's really up to the court to decide. Yeah. Any other questions? And then I think there are folks on the line. I'm not sure. I'm looking for Dan. I'm not sure if they're able to ask questions through the line, Dan. Is that right? So just in case there's someone who's on the line, I think I'd be able to hear you if you were to ask. If someone is listening and who wants to ask, we'd be happy to take a question from you if you have one. Yeah, go ahead, Susanna. Yep, so we'll take one more from Susanna. Go ahead. Absolutely. Bertola. So I'll repeat the question. Go ahead, Susanna. Bertola, come on up. Yeah, go ahead. So I'm going to move the mic down towards you. Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Hi, fine, thank you.
Good. I'd like to know, did the 2018 law end up helping you and your husband obtain benefits that you've been waiting on?
We had applied before the law came into play, and our attorney attempted to apply both of them simultaneously. And I think it went through the old law.
So since the law went into effect, I didn't read the very end of what you said. Have you been able to obtain benefits that before you were not getting?
No, we were in the process under the old law, and we continued under that one. But we did apply under the new law also, and that's somewhat in process still.
It's in process?
Yes.
Are there still some medical treatments or other things that you're not able to access?
The majority of the treatment was done under Social Security disability for my husband. When we were attempting to get treatment, what Elle and I did is they sent Abe for 14 IMEs within a year and a half to fight him. 14 in a year and a half.
Say what an IME is.
It's an independent medical examiner. It's an independent doctor that Elle and I hires and pretty much micromanages everything. And it's usually to the disadvantage of the worker.
And what was your reaction when you found out that the Biden administration was taking the case one more time, and last shot, to the Supreme Court? What was your reaction?
I was standing up and I had to sit down. Because the workers need this law. They deserve this law. They have worked and paid with their life and injuries to clean up one of the most toxic sites, and I do not understand it.
What does that say to you? Does it give you a message to your husband and to the workforce from the federal government? What does it feel like they're saying to you?
They're saying workers in Hanford are a commodity and expendable. That's how it makes me feel.
And how do you feel about that?
With what it did to my husband, because in his retirement years, he wanted to teach math at a college, at a trade school, or at a high school. That ability was taken away from him. And it impacts workers. And all he was doing was attempting to help clean up a toxic waste site. And hurt him and stopped his dreams of even helping our grandchildren go on to college. and him have what he should have had, is continue to be productive. And it just saddens me. And it's not happened just to him, to hundreds and thousands of workers. And what's frightening, it will continue for generations on.
Are there any other questions? Yep, go ahead, Susanna. Yeah, that's right.
Are there any other workers, like, is that Diana? Dave or, yeah.
It's Faye Leaguer.
Is there any, I'd like to hear from as many of you that would feel comfortable talking at all, just to give us a little reaction of what's going on.
Does anybody wish to come forward? And we can make folks available afterwards as well, Susanna, if folks want to speak directly to the press. But if you don't mind just introducing yourself, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Faye Leaguer, and I was working at the site in 2001 as a planner scheduler, which is a non-union job, so I had no protections of the union contracts. I was exposed to toxic chemicals that took away 30% of my lung capacity. I also have problems with my voice now. I have also had issues because of the medications. I had a bleed in my eye because of the high-dose steroids in order to help my lungs. During the adjudication of my claim in 2001 through 2007, the administrator for the site mocked me in emails to their attorney that, oh, here's another doctor report. Isn't this just too bad? Oh, ha, 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 look at this. And it's all in the record with the state. The state did nothing to make them behave because Hanford is self-insured. This challenge of the state law is going to embolden the Department of Energy to continue to fight even the claims that have been approved. I'm helping one of the former workers who was approved under the state, but Department of Energy has hired lawyers and is fighting the state's approval against the state. So if this passes federal review and this law is struck down, we will go back to the way it was in 2001 through 2007, when I had to fight them with everything I had. And they mocked me. They said, oh, you're not sick. They sent me to independent medical examinations where, I kid you not, one of the doctors showed up in clothes that looked like she had slept in them, and then proceeded to tell me that nothing was wrong with me. The system is broken. The system needs to be fixed, and we're not going to do it by letting the federal court take down this state law.
I'm curious if there's anyone here who has benefited, who thinks they've benefited from
Hello, my name is David Klug. I've worked at the tank farms for about 30 years now. During that time, I've been a lead worker for single shell tanks, removing waste from the single shell tanks and pumping to the double shell tanks. I was involved in an exposure in 2010. That day we had just started tank C104, and we started it that morning, and I actually worked a double shift. And people were complaining about the vapors being bad, but I was in the control room the whole time. I didn't really realize how bad until toward the end of the shift. We did what we call a pump down, and we used the waste from the double shell tank to break up the waste in the single shell tank, and it creates a huge cavity in the single shell tank. So it's, you know, you have all this exposed waste that hasn't been exposed for, 30, 40 years or longer. We did this pump down at the end of the shift, and we started exiting the control room, and it started stinking really bad. I mean, it was awful. And I'd been trapped in the control room for several hours, so I just walked over maybe another 30, 40 yards. We had an outhouse there, and it was in an area, next to an area we called the ZOD, and it had been called that for kind of a slang for years. It was known as the zone of death. But it was between C Farm and AN Farm, and it was kind of the downstream side. And our outhouse was right there next to this zone of death. And after using the restroom, I walked out, and I could feel, it was kind of a cold January day. There was a temperature inversion. I could feel like this warm air hit me, and it took my breath away. And you could feel it. It's hitting your skin, and if you look out in C Farm, it was kind of down in a hole, and our control room's up on top of a hill. This exhaust stack at that time was blowing right back at our control room. There was probably about 7 or 8 of us that had symptoms, and they'd sent us to Cadillac, and because of back shift, the HPMC wasn't open, so they did x-rays and everything at Cadillac, and I was having tightness in my chest, my heart rate was going crazy, kind of had like a really bad brain fog, couldn't breathe very well, and I got a call a couple days later from Cadillac, and this doctor, PA I think he was, but he said that he had just gotten back from the Gulf War, and he goes, "You've got chemical pneumonitis." He said, it's like an inflammation of your lungs. And so I go to see my doctor, and he verified it, and it looks abnormal, so, put me on prednisone and all this and that. Well, in the meantime, I'd only missed a few days, and I've seen my pulmonologist, and he put a work restriction on me that told me I shouldn't be around tank vapors until they figured out what it was that was causing my issues. And so I did that, and the work accommodated me for like 2 months. And in the meantime, my doctor's asking me, what was it that you were exposed to? And well, I couldn't tell him, so I'm, of course, work, you ask them. Well, they did ammonia detection in my work area, so I wasn't exposed to anything. Well, later, probably about 3 hours after our exposure, they sent the IH out, and they did stack samples, and those stack samples came out several hundred times over the limit. I mean, there was mercury, ammonia, nitrosamines, the list goes on, but they were all several hundred times over the limit. Well, I asked the IH tech, says, can I have those results to show to my doctors to see what it was that, maybe I was exposed to? And they wouldn't give them to me. And so I complained a little bit, and I wrote a letter to the president of the company and asked him why it was so hard to get these survey results to show to my doctors so they could treat me. And I wrote this letter to the president of the company on a Wednesday. Well, that Friday I got pulled into the office, my boss's office, and he goes, we're not going to accommodate your work restrictions anymore. So he sent me home, and I was home for 11 months, and then the whole time I was getting what they called provisional time loss benefits, which means that if my claim got denied, they could possibly come after me and make me pay these back. And the whole time dealing with Penzer, it was a fight and a struggle. They sent me to IMEs all the time, and every time I'd go to a doctor, they'd send me to an IME. One time they even sent me to an IME over in Seattle in the middle of the winter, and I asked the Penzer, and I go, why are you sending me to the doctor? It was a pulmonologist, and why are you sending me to Seattle, over the mountain in the snow when there's pulmonologists local, and I can maybe go to Spokane. And he goes, no, we want you to go to this one. And so I looked up on the internet and this lady's name, and there's like pages and pages of bad comments on the internet about this IME doctor. Her nickname on the internet was Dr. Death, or Dr. Evil, Dr. Evil. So like, are you guys really going to send me to Dr. Evil? And she goes, yeah, we had good luck with her, like I'm sure you have. But anyway, they paid me these provisional time loss benefits all the way up until almost Thanksgiving time, and I'm supposed to get a paycheck on, right around Thanksgiving time. Well, nothing comes, and of course I can't get a hold of Penzer because they're holiday season and they're all off on vacation. So I think it was like almost after Christmas, New Year's time frame when I finally got a hold of Penzer, and they're like, well, we're not going to pay you anymore. We sent you this IME and they said you can work. And I'm like, well, my doctor never said I couldn't work, you know. So I was like, what do I got to do, you know? And they said, well, you got to go through HPMC and get released, you know. So I try to call them, and they're 2 weeks out. So I'm going almost two months without any pay at all, you know, living on my credit cards and you know, deeming some of my 401k loans that I actually had to pay. And they finally back paid me, and I get back to work, and this whole time my claims had been denied. And I was out in Sea Farm again, and I came across twice. One of our exhausters was leaking fluid out of the ductwork, you know. It was, you know, tank condensate, you know. So at that time, anytime you reported a spill, they made you go to HPMC and get evaluated. So I went there, they did blood work and whatnot.
Sorry, were you able, I think she's curious, did you ever get the benefits? Were you ever able to get the benefits?
Eventually, I'm getting to that. But finally, after I go get this, they asked me if I wanted to do another claim. So I did. I said, well, I'm still having symptoms from the last time. So before I even had a chance to see my doctor, they sent me to another IME over this leak in the ductwork. And thankfully, this doctor, you know, finally, you know, affirmed everything that, you know, my doctors were claiming, and that's the only reason I got my claim backed up. But it was the whole year and a half. And in that time I had thyroid cancer, and that's all been getting denied. I had half my thyroid removed, and that claim had been denied up until this program got put through, and they finally, I got paid through the program, and they opened a claim for my thyroid issues. But
so your thyroid cancer would not claim it been denied?
yes, because I hired in 92, so I don't meet the criteria for the EOCPA, but through this program it got approved through the LNI. Yes. Yes.
What has that meant to you to get that claim accepted?
It helped a lot. I mean, you know, and I don't think it would have got anywhere with it if it wasn't for this program and the hard work that these guys do to get it through, you know.
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you. And so, you know, those stories are just a couple. And I think, as you said, Bertola, there are hundreds, thousands more. And so just as a final thought as we wrap up, I believe that there are some workers here who are available if you want to ask one-on-one, ask any further questions about their stories. I think some of them are available if you want to chat with them. I want to thank everybody for being here. Look, a guy in a suit only gets so far, right, with the public, right? I know that. I can do okay in a courtroom, but when you're talking to the public, honestly, I mean this, right? It's having people who are living the experience and going through what you're going through, and frankly, being courageous enough to get in front of a whole bunch of cameras and tell the public details about what must be a painful experience, to put it mildly. That takes a lot of guts. But it's critical for what we're trying to communicate. Again, back to the idea that a legal case can be boring in a certain way, but those stories are what the case is actually about, right? And the good news is that this can all come to an end with a really simple decision. There's something that's not complicated. Somebody in the Department of Justice can simply file a one-page statement with the court saying, you know what, Supreme Court, we're not going to appeal this after all. They can do that. Nothing stops them from doing it. They can do that. Nothing requires them to appeal this. They can do that. And that, of course, is exactly what we're asking. Maybe the final thought I'll say, it did occur to me as we were all here, that the effort to stand up for workers at Hanford, to protect workers, has been a bipartisan effort here in Washington State. Larry and I are different political parties. The state legislature that voted for Larry's bill overwhelmingly was a bipartisan vote. I'm pretty confident the folks behind us were probably a pretty bipartisan group of men and women, would be my guess, right? Ironically, we've had bipartisan opposition from the federal government. I've filed over 100 lawsuits against different administrations. The first one was against the Obama administration about worker safety at Hanford. So whether it's the Obama administration or the Trump administration or now the Biden administration, we've got bipartisan opposition to the work we're trying to do to stand up for Hanford workers. And it should not be this hard, right? It should not be this hard. And so, we're going to continue to fight. And, I believe with the support of everybody here, we will prevail. And, the last thing I just would want everybody here to know, so we're speaking to the folks who are here and the men and women who work at Hanford. And I think we were talking, Nick, earlier, and we had a meeting here years ago, about worker safety at Hanford. And I remember saying, I've got a brother who works in Alaska every year who's got a really challenging job. He's got a really challenging job. He works 10 hours. He's up there for months at a time. And I remember saying, look, he's got a demanding job. And if his workplace did not provide a safe work environment for him, that would tick me off. He's my brother, right? And what I remember saying was, well, that's how I feel about the workers at Hanford. I view those workers, how would I feel if that was my brother or my sister or my mom or dad working there? And my legal team, we should all take that approach, because guess what? Everybody's got a family member, as you said, Bertola, right, who's impacted by this. And so, I just got a text from my brother an hour ago. He's coming back from Alaska, right? He's had a safe journey up there. And so we will all work as if the folks there at Hanford are our brothers and sisters, our moms and dads. And frankly, the people, the federal government should view it the same way. They should view it it's not complicated. They should view it the same way, and we're going to fight until they get that message and they act on it and do what's right for the workers at Hanford. Thanks again to all of you for being here. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. Have a great day.